Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the oh so popular ASUS Geforce RTX 3050 DUAL. Is it any good? Is it worth buying? What are the options? Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at the ASUS Geforce RTX 3050 DUAL. This is a rather diminutive version of the Geforce RTX 3050. Got a compact card, quite slimline, especially in comparison to some of the others we've seen already, such as the MSI, which you may have seen already. This one actually comes in at a relatively lower price, comparatively to some of the other RTX 3050s on the market, although obviously, depending on the time you're watching this and the country you're in, etc., you may find better or worse deals. This, at the moment in the UK, we're looking at somewhere in the region of like £275 to £300, which is still not ideal, let's be honest, for an RTX 3050, which kind of effectively is similar to the 1660 Ti, 1660 Super, the GTX 1070, and the RX 6600 in certain instances. So in its actual position in the market, it isn't the best price, really. It certainly isn't. And we are starting to see the RX 6600 dropping in price on a daily basis. At the moment, there's actually one available from Amazon Spain for around about £280, which is pretty much slap bang exactly the same price as this. It is a little bit quicker. RTX is going to be better on this. So there are pros and cons, and maybe you are a NVIDIA fan. You want to use things DLSS, maybe you want to do some streaming, so you're going to use the NVENC encoder, any of the AI features that are incorporated in those tensor cores. So potentially this is going to be the one you're going to go for, which is probably why you're watching this video, just to have morbid curiosity, and maybe you just can't get hold of an RTX 3060 or 3060 Ti, the Founders Editions, etc. So you're thinking about getting one of these. So should you actually get one? Now I'm going to try not to answer that particular question. In the video, I'm going to go through some of the the rule specs of this card, go through sizes, etc., what it's all about. We're going to look at some gameplay for sure, as we generally tend to. I'm not going to go massively in depth. If you want to go into things like that, there are other channels which will do game by game analysis and give you the best idea. I'm going to give you my opinion. I've tested this against various other cards, RTX 2060, which I've had in my rig, 2060 Super, and other 3050 cards. So I'm in a pretty good position to tell you if it's worth getting, if it's going to be too loud, if it's going to be too hot, that kind of thing. Anyway, let's get on with this. So first of all, the card itself, it's a relatively plain affair. It's got some interesting design language going on the front there, and also the fans are axial fans. I actually quite like the idea of the fans where they've got the solid ring around the outside edge, so that is going to make so when the blade is spinning, the air towards the end that is being forced outward can't go out, it must go down because of the blade, so it pushes the air further into the heatsink to keep things nice and cool. Now, because this is a much smaller card than the MSI version, the 3050, this card does get a little bit hotter. So this is going to be running, on average, somewhere between 5 to 10 degrees hotter than the MSI RTX 3050. Now, the RTX 3050 from MSI does cost a little bit more, so it is kind of swings and roundabouts depending what you want. If you don't have the room for the RTX 3050 from MSI, because it is a rather chunky card, then this might be a better alternative and certainly is a little bit cheaper. If you've got some relatively good airflow in your case, it shouldn't be a problem at all. You have got a metal back on this one, so unlike some of the 50 series that we're used to seeing, such as the 1050, 1050 Ti's, etc., generally they won't have a backplate. This one actually does have a metal backplate in place, and I have had a closer inspection. There does appear to be some contact points as well, so it is actually doing something in particular. It is actually moving some of that heat from the back of the system itself, so it is doing a little bit of work there. It isn't just purely for looks. The heatsink itself is actually relatively easy to remove. As far as I can tell at the moment, one of the easier ones to actually do. So you've got 4 screws, which are the main ones for the actual core itself. Then you've got 2 additional screws there, which are kind of stabilizing ones. Just 6 screws. You can take the whole thing off and do your repasting, your maintenance, getting rid of dust, all that kind of stuff. So in terms of ease of use and maintenance wise, this at the moment is top of the class. Other parts of it, which are little details, there is a LED which is built into here. It does say on the box there is a subtle LED, and it is extremely subtle, so there's a little bit of kind of pinky blue that goes around there, which will tie in with certain systems. You're probably seeing some B-roll from earlier on with this actually inside the PC behind me. And actually, when it's in RGB puke mode, it does kind of blend in somewhat well. Obviously, if the blue and pink or that sort of lighting isn't your thing, then you can potentially disable it if you wanted to. Even a little bit of tape over it would hide it very easily. It is very, very discreet. Something else of note is there is an 8-pin connector on here, so this does require a PCI Express power section, 8 pins. You will need that, although this doesn't use a great deal of power. Looking at a TDP somewhere in the region of about 130 watts. Depending on the load and the game and the boost clocks, then you may see it drawing considerably more than that, but 130 is its rated TDP. And talking of boost clocks, the rated clocks for this are actually relatively low, somewhere around the 1800 megahertz range, although in reality, in gameplay, this is easily hitting 1950 pretty much constantly, so you should see a significant boost over the rated clocks on the box. It has got 8 gigabytes of RAM on this card, so we're looking at a 128-bit bus. Not ideal, but it gets the job done. And also you're looking at a 7 gigabit per second memory speed, which is realistically 14 gigabits because it is DDR RAM, so double data rate, etc, etc. Yeah, 128-bit bus, RTX core, so this is the 3rd generation Tensor core, 2nd generation RTX. So yeah, all in all, it kind of, we've seen it all before. It's nothing exciting. Essentially, this is a cut down 3060. So the 3060s, which don't quite cut the mustard, have a little bit lopped off here and there, and essentially this is what you get, the RTX 3050. But something which hasn't been cut down is the outputs on the back. So we've got 3 display ports, 1 HDMI. The HDMI is going to support HDMI 2.1 or 2.1A or whatever they're going to call it these days. So that is going to support 4K 120Hz variable refresh or higher, depending on your monitor, what it's capable of, etc. DisplayPort is going to be DisplayPort 1.4. So again, realistically, this card, if it needs to, can output up to an 8K signal at 60 Hz, which realistically no one's going to want to do. But if you do want to do 4K, then 4K is not too much of a problem for things like videos and for just monitor work-wise. Maybe you're using Adobe Premiere or Photoshop, something like that. 4K is going to be fine with that. For gaming, I think realistically we are going to be looking at 1080p as your kind of base level. Realistically, for most games with all the eye candy turned on, 1080p ultra settings in most games, you're going to be looking at 60 frames per second as a kind of minimum range. And obviously for some esports titles, you're going to be getting, like in CSGO and things like that, you're going to be getting sort of 250 to 400 frames per second very easily, 1080p on those ultra high settings. Where it starts to crumble is if you do RTX on, in which case even things like Fortnite, if you have 1080p ultra settings and you flick on the RTX lighting, then you are going to be hobbling around the sort of 30 to 45 frames per second, which, although it is actually playable, and you're probably seeing some gameplay from a little bit earlier I did today, and surprisingly actually, even though it was a basically a cinematic experience, I actually didn't do too bad and got some headshots and some kills in, so it's not all bad. It looks amazing, it's just the gameplay isn't that good. And actually going back to gameplay, when you are actually playing games in this, I was actually very surprised. The fans never seem to ramp up as much as I thought they would. Certainly I've had the AMD version of this kind of layout card, so the Dual series, which was the 6500 XT, which you can check out from the links in the video description or just check out the playlists. These particular fans, or ones that looked very similar to these, actually were quite noisy in that particular card, which confused me because this, even under full load, gets up to about 60, maybe 65 degrees maximum, but the fans themselves stay very quiet. So potentially there's a little bit of headroom there for potentially a little bit of overclocking or maybe adjusting the fan curves. It does have 0 fan mode, so if you're not taxing the graphics card, then the fans will stop spinning, which is always a nice thing. So if you want that silent desktop PC when you're actually working, but for the fans to kick it when you're gaming, it will definitely do that. And talking of gaming, we should take a look at some gameplay, so let's go ahead and do that now. First of all, we're going to take a look at Cyberpunk 2077. So actually running this 1080p with all the eye candy turned on, with RTX off, but also with the frame limiters on, so we do get the best experience. We're still looking around about 100, 120, 100 frames per second in the benchmark routine, so it goes through that very easily. And actually I went through 4 different settings, so this is the default low settings with high textures, default settings with low textures, and then high and high, all of it on 1080p, and they kind of all looked exactly the same really. I didn't notice a great deal of difference, and actually the frame rates were very similar as well. It does differ a little bit when we turn RTX on, unless you enable DLSS, which is one of this card's strong points. When you enable DLSS, it does magical things, and even in some games where RTX normally would bring it to its knees, it does allow this card to actually still do essentially the same frame rates as what you'd see without RTX, but with it on. Although, again, most people probably couldn't tell the difference, and a lot of people, if you put two screens identically next to each other, RTX on, RTX off, you struggle to find the difference unless you look at certain aspects. So yeah, RTX is still not one of those things which I think people are going to rush out and grab a graphics card for, but it's still relatively in its infancy, so things may get better as we go on. So Cyberpunk, absolutely no problem at all, runs absolutely fine. You can tweak the settings to your heart's content to find out what works best for you, and certainly I would recommend doing that. Let's take a look at something else a little bit easier to run. So this is going to be a more CPU bound game. Let's look at CSGO. Now CSGO, looking anywhere between 200 and 400 frames per second. This is 1080p, all the settings cranked up. So clearly competitive play with this at 1080p isn't going to be a problem at all. And if you turn down the eye candy, which gamers or hardcore gamers potentially will do, then you're going to get even higher, but you're going to be limited probably by the game engine anyway at that point. So certainly games like that, older esport titles are going to be absolutely fine. And also the same is applicable to games like Rocket League. So playing Rocket League today, again, the same sort of thing. Anywhere between 250 to 400 frames per second, 1080p, all the settings on high, it runs absolutely fine. So as you'd expect, a kind of more esportsy title runs no problems whatsoever. If you try and play something a little bit more heavy duty, so something like Wreckfest, again, 1080p, ultra settings, then you are going to see a slight reduction in frame rates. We're looking at anywhere between 100 to 150 frames per second. Again, with games like this, it's going to be very dependent on the lighting and also the actual map itself, the terrain it has to render. But realistically, if you're into Wreckfest and you want to get somewhere in the region of about 150 frames per second, because you've got your 165 Hz monitor, then you're going to be fine, no problems at all. Looking at a game engine which is actually more optimized towards AMD cards, but still is playable on these NVIDIA models, then let's look at Far Cry 6. Now Far Cry 6, various different tests on this, RTX on, RTX off, again doesn't seem to make a huge amount of difference, still extremely playable. You're still going to be looking at getting 60 to 80 frames per second in general at 1080p with ultra settings, and again you can take advantage of things like DLSS in this particular title. So if you do want to flick RTX on and have that nicer eye candy, then it will sample the frame slightly differently to allow it to do that at an acceptable frame rate. And of course you can actually set a specific frame rate that you want to meet, and also you can turn on things like FXR and all those kinds of things, all the other little tweaks that will allow the game to run a little bit better. But certainly Far Cry 6, no problems at all, and it looks wonderful. Heading over to Fortnite. Now Fortnite, like I said earlier on, playing Fortnite with RTX on, basically 1080p, everything set to the wall, this struggles. It really does struggle, especially depending where you are in the map. Even with a somewhat more beach-like scene, it still was struggling. So we're looking, it's bouncing between sort of 30s to 40s, maybe if you're lucky heading into 50 frames per second. Again, totally playable. You can play it like that. There isn't any reason why you shouldn't do. It does look exceptionally nice. The shadows, the shading, and all that kind of stuff looks amazing. But I think really you probably want to turn RTX off. But again, still with 1080p, ultra settings, epic view distance, all that kind of stuff, you're going to be easily getting somewhere in the region of 130 to 150 frames per second pretty constantly. Again, it is an extremely varied map, so depending where you are, if you're inside a building, your frame rate is going to shoot up. If you're out in the open world, then your frame rate is going to dip a little bit, but certainly it does seem to keep up at those higher refresh rates. So there you go. Nothing overly special about this card, and it kind of is what it is. I know that is a cliche term, but it is. This is a lower end model. Clearly the dual range is towards the bottom end of the stack. It doesn't have those nice frills. It just gets the job done. There are things which they've done which make this card a little bit cheaper. The plastic itself does feel a little bit on the cheap side. Certain other aspects, the kind of branding, you may or may not like. If you're someone who's into ASUS and you've got maybe an ASUS Prime motherboard, then this kind of look is going to tie in quite nicely. It does look very similar. So again, ASUS Prime range is their kind of more lower level range. So you could pair it with this, have yourself a relatively inexpensive PC, but still have an ASUS ecosystem going on, which is quite nice. The card itself, very small, very compact, somewhere in the region about 38mm deep, so it is a true double slot card. So if you're maybe putting it into a case where you're thinking of vertically mounting it, then it's going to be easy to do that. It doesn't need 2.5 bays or 3 bays to actually install the card, so that's absolutely fine. Yeah, it's very much one of those meh products. The thing that makes this really awkward is the fact of where it is priced. Now, if you can pick this up for somewhere in the region of about £250, I would say it's probably getting to be in that right ballpark. It is a pretty powerful card, and let's not forget, it is realistically it's an RTX 3060 downclocked and with a few bits chopped off. The 3060 is still a decent card. Again, this is going to be one of those things, if you've got something like a GTX 1070 already, then this is kind of pointless. There's not much of an improvement. It is a slight improvement, but not a great deal. It depends what you're going from, what you're coming to, and ultimately it's going to come down to pricing. So I wish I could say to you, yes, go out and definitely buy one of these. It's a great card. It isn't. And that would be applicable to all of the RTX 3050 range in terms of desktop cards. They're that really odd child, the middle child, which kind of gets a little bit overlooked. There's the bottom end, which is attracted to the budget buyer. You've got the higher end, which is attracted to the more enthusiast buyer. And this is stuck somewhere weirdly in between. Anyway, that's going to wrap this one up. Hopefully you've liked this video. If you have, smash the like button and hit subscribe and all that kind of usual YouTube stuff. Any comments or questions, stick them in the comments section below. Actually genuinely interested to hear what your thoughts are on the RTX 3050 range and this model in particular. I do actually know that some of you in Australia seem to be getting these at exceptionally good prices, somewhere in the region of about $250, which considering the exchange rate with the UK, that would be somewhere in the region of about £150, possibly, maybe even a little bit less. So you guys are getting an absolute steal for this particular card, but I think the rest of us in the rest of the world seem to be getting pretty much shafted. Anyway, let me know in the comment section below. But for now, I'll be Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.